Photography and photojournalism specifically have caused the toilet paper famine that we're going through now and shaped the coronavirus and our response to it in many other ways. Let's take a close look at what that means. First, I want to thank our sponsor, Me. We're sheltering at home, and I know a lot of you are, and that's a great time to learn something, but YouTube is not a great place to learn stuff. It's a great place to get tips, but you can't develop skills. We do have a lot of training material here, and we're selling it for 50% off because I know a lot of you have also had to hit your income. We have, of course, Stunning Digital Photography, the #1 photography book in the world with over 20 hours of video training integrated right into it, practices, a Facebook group that you can join. We have our Lightroom Classic book, which teaches you post-processing. It also includes 14 hours of video. By the way, this is where I ship everything directly to people. We have our Photoshop book if you want to take your post-processing to the next level, and our photography buying guide, which helps you understand little things like what rolling shutter means and whether that should impact your buying choices. We also have video training, some really high-end video training, of course, our art and science of photography with 10 hours of video. That includes video training that goes way deeper than we could possibly go on YouTube. And if you actually want to make money with your photography, our Professional Portraits video training series teaches you the business of photography, things like negotiating with clients, how to make more money from each client, dealing with contracts and attorneys and all that. And we have some Lightroom presets too. We have our creative and technical preset pack, which has some really cool things that'll get Lightroom to do things you couldn't otherwise do, and Chelsea's autumn preset pack from last fall. All of this stuff is 50% off, so head to northrop.photo and use the coupon code LEARN@HOME. Thanks. First, let's talk about the toilet paper famine before we get into everything else. This is a picture from February 28th, really before the famine started. Just to validate that, here's a chart of Google Trends showing people searching for the term toilet paper. February 28th is right about here, way before this big spike that defined the toilet paper famine. Any reasonable person looks at this photo and sees a crazy person loading a decade's worth of toilet paper into a shopping cart. But if we look at the caption that accompanied the picture in the news article, we get a little more insight. Shoppers in a Costco store buy toilet paper, a product in high demand, after the Hawaii Department of Health on Wednesday advised residents they should stock up on a 14-day supply of food, water, and other necessities. Oh my God, why are people being so ridiculous? Why are you buying so much toilet paper? Enhance. As I look at the image, I can see she is buying 1 unit of toilet paper. She's in a Costco. And if you haven't been in one of these stores, they sell stuff in bulk. And this is 1 unit. This is the smallest unit of toilet paper that she can buy. So she's not being unreasonable at all. Here's a still from a video clip showing a woman loading a similar container of paper towels into her vehicle. One was toilet paper, one was paper towels. What do those two things have in common? They're literally the biggest items you can buy at the store. They take up the most shelf space, and if you're telling a story of how people are stocking up, which do you think creates the more compelling image? An image of somebody loading in a single can of chicken noodle soup, or someone loading in a massive human-sized roll of paper towels? So if you were a photojournalist tasked with capturing images and video to accompany a story about stocking up, which of those items might you show someone loading into their cart? Now, these images were released about February, before this panic started, but I believe many people saw these images and began to think, oh my God, these people are buying all the toilet paper, all the paper towels. These are things that I actually do need for the next month, and I have some, but if they're taking all of it, what if I run out? That would be a gross situation, right? So that made me feel like I needed to go out and buy some, even though I didn't have any particular urgency. Then, supported by this, we started to see images of empty shelves like this one. Here the photographer shows completely empty shelves where all the toilet paper and paper towels would have been. But again, let's put ourselves in the shoe of a photojournalist and ask, what's the best way to capture an image talking about how people are stocking up and emptying the shelves? When I went to my grocery store, I thought I'd get to the canned food aisle and everything would be empty because that's what I felt like I needed to stock up on. And indeed, maybe 2/3 of the cans were gone, but there were still plenty of cans because after all, a typical store shelf might have 400 cans of beans. But when you go to the toilet paper aisle, toilet paper and paper towels come in such big containers that if 30, 40 people were to each buy 1 unit of them, the shelves look like this, at least until they can be restocked. So as a photojournalist, you create a much more compelling image by choosing the most empty shelves, which, because of the way those items are packaged, is always going to be paper towels and toilet paper. So indeed, I don't think there was ever initially greater demand for these items, and if people hadn't chosen those items to show in their imagery, there never would have been a famine. This image also has some interesting compositional techniques used to really underscore the point that the shelves are empty, and we'll come back to those in just a minute. First, I want to talk about how photojournalism has changed government policy around Florida's beaches. Last week, we all saw the spring breakers enjoying the beaches, and many of us who were quarantined at home and trying to do the right thing actually felt a little mad and indignant, like those people were putting everybody else at risk by being on the beach. Those images caused citizens of Florida to put pressure on their own governor to close the beaches down. And within a couple of days, many, maybe most, beaches had indeed been shut down. If those pictures had not created this sort of viral cycle that led back to putting pressure on the government, I'm certain those beaches would not have been closed on their own. And in this way, we see very directly how photojournalism can impact the real world and impact the spreading of something like the coronavirus. Now let's look into the truth of photojournalism by examining the stories of Los Angeles. Crowds packed California beaches despite shelter-in-place order. And here we have an accompanying image that shows the beach absolutely packed. On the other hand, a handful of visitors walk on a largely deserted Santa Monica beach. These are both in LA. They're both beaches, and they're both released about the same time. One says the beach is completely packed, and the other shows it completely empty. Me, not a Californian, how am I supposed to know what's actually going down over there? I don't know if you people are being responsible or you're being crazy. The truth is probably going to be something in between, because photojournalism tends to select those images at the more extreme ends. After all, it's more interesting if a photo is extreme than if somebody says, almost everybody has left the beach, but there are still quite a few people around. It's 40% less. No, you want to hear it's 0% or it's 100%. You don't want to hear 40%, right? The photojournalists were able to tell perhaps an exaggerated story by using location, timing, and compositional techniques. And whether you're a photojournalist or not, these are important to understand if you create images that tell a story. And nowadays, everybody is a storyteller, even landscape photographers. Let's look at this image of the crowded beach. First, the location. Obviously, as a photographer, you would choose a spot where you were going to have the most traffic possible, and you would pick your timing for when it was going to be busiest. You wouldn't want to pick an empty spot on the beach at 7 a.m. unless maybe you were telling a story of how the beach was actually empty. The composition is where it gets really interesting. Here the photographer chose a telephoto lens. The telephoto lens compresses the foreground and the background. Background subjects appear to be close to foreground subjects. Chelsea and I made a whole tutorial about this, so let's watch that segment.
Now we're going to be talking about how to use forced perspective in your photos.
I'll take a couple of steps back. So I'm usually taller than Chelsea, but I took a couple of steps back and now we're about the same size.
You can also change how you control perspective by changing your focal length and your distance from your subject. So Tony and I are in the same exact spots, but we had Justin get a more wide angle lens and move closer to us. So now, even though Tony's in the same spot, he looks much smaller.
If you want to pull faraway subjects even closer, use a telephoto lens. Just zoom in. The more you zoom, the closer they'll get. I'm still at the same distance to Chelsea. We just had our cameraman Justin back up even farther and use a super telephoto lens. Thus, the people in this image could have easily had more than 6 feet between them, as you're supposed to, but it's impossible to tell when everybody is crammed into a frame like that. The angle of the camera almost completely eliminates negative space, which helps to make us feel more claustrophobic and makes it feel like everything is more busy. You can see almost all of the sky is completely cropped out. The photographer angled the camera down so that only a sliver of the horizon existed to give us a frame of reference, but they could have easily angled it up and gotten low and filled the frame with the sky and maybe only 1 or 2 people. But by using this technique, they were able to fill like 85% of the frame with just people's body and different types of clutter. Contrast this with the image that was attempting to show that the beach indeed was not busy at all. The photographer obviously chose a less busy spot. The photographer put distance between themselves and the subjects. Most importantly though, the photographer chose a wide angle lens. The wide angle lens introduces forced perspective, making subjects close to the camera appear very big and subjects far away from the camera appear very small. In this image, we can see quite a few people, but they take up a very small percentage of the frame. We can tell it's a wide angle lens from the way the path here disappears into the horizon and the way the sun is really, really small. My guess, this is probably like a 16, 18 millimeter lens on a full frame camera. By providing so much negative space in the frame, it feels like everything is deserted. Look, drop me or any experienced photographer into a beach with a moderate number of people, and I can tell a visual story of the beach being crowded or a visual story of the beach being empty by using these different techniques. Let's talk about LA traffic. I'm seeing a lot of information saying that LA has no traffic whatsoever, and I've been in LA so much that that would be really shocking because LA traffic sucks. Images like this are circulating. The caption says, "The 110 Harbor Freeway in downtown Los Angeles is largely traffic-free on March 22nd. Is this actually true? I don't know. I knew when I saw the image, I thought, I can't trust that at all, because the photojournalist could be using various types of trickery to tell a story that might not be 100% true. First, like the last beach shot, they chose a spot with a lot of negative space. Here, the road is surrounded by trees and kind of openness, and they're positioning themselves above the middle of the road to maximize the amount of empty road that we see. It's a moderately wide angle lens, which means that the distant subjects, like the cars, have become very, very small, consuming a very tiny portion of the frame. But on this photo, I believe timing was the key element. You see, traffic moves in wolf packs. People in cars tend to group together, and even in higher traffic days, there's dense spots and fairly empty spots. You can see the traffic seems to be moving away, and it's close to the horizon and very small. But those same cars, moments before, would have been directly in the foreground, directly under the camera, filling up that road. If you'd shot this 20 seconds before, it would have looked like a pretty busy day on the highway. I wanted to ask myself, like, how much traffic is there actually? Is there any way to find an unbiased photo of traffic? And I thought, there's traffic webcams. I can just look this up. And so this morning at like 7 a.m. California time, I just grabbed stills from several different webcams, and this is what traffic actually looks like. So you can see the image here isn't telling a wholly truthful story. The roads indeed are not nearly that empty, but it's telling a more interesting story, and thus it's the image that the editors are likely to pick and the image that's more likely to get shared. This image of New York's Times Square exhibits a lot of the same techniques for showing an empty space. People want to say, oh my God, everything's shut down, so Times Square is just a ghost town now. I don't trust photojournalists enough to know whether it is or not. And from looking at this image, I can see they've employed several different techniques to exaggerate the emptiness of it. First, they chose a spot in the middle of the road, and the road, of course, is the only place that is clear and would produce low detail in an image. You wouldn't want to be, for example, right next to one of the big signs because that would be visually cluttered and wouldn't support that feeling of emptiness. Only the road would. They also employed timing in that they had to wait for a moment when there was no traffic. I have looked up webcams of Times Square and traffic is still flowing through it. People are still walking through it. Just there's not very many, but nonetheless, the photographer definitely couldn't have stepped there at a random time, or there probably would have been a taxi or something going past. Once again, they used forced perspective in a wide-angle camera. You can see people on the sidewalk here. But because it's a wide-angle camera, they are so small in the frame that you wouldn't notice it unless you looked really closely. Most of what we see is just 20, 30 feet of road in front of the photographer. And indeed, even on a busy day at Times Square, if you were to step in front of the crosswalk and wait for traffic to clear out, you could take a very similar image to this and then tell a story about it being not that busy if you wanted to. On the other hand, if you wanted to say, hey, people are still going to Times Square, isn't that ridiculous? You could walk up to the group of people there, use a telephoto lens, show them in the foreground, the signs in the background, and it would indeed seem like it was busy with foot traffic. Another similar shot of Grand Central Station. Again, the frame is filled with mostly empty floor, walls, and ceiling. A wide-angle camera with the lens pointed up fills the frame with what would always be empty. There's nobody on the walls and the ceiling, but 80% of the frame is walls and ceiling here. We do see a few people on the floor. The photographer could have positioned themselves in front of those people, but no, they chose an empty spot. I'm confident Grand Central Terminal is actually very, very quiet. The point I wanted to make is the photojournalist is using compositional techniques, timing and location to underscore that story and perhaps exaggerate it a little bit. So let's circle back to this photo of the shelves. We see again a wide angle lens used to employ forced perspective to make foreground subjects appear disproportionately large compared to background subjects. And in the foreground here, we have empty shelves. But if we look down just 15 feet or so, what do we see? We see a bunch of toilet paper. The shelves are not actually empty. This person is buying toilet paper. Even this photojournalist couldn't find a completely empty shelf to photograph. They just found an almost empty shelf. The real famine here is they can't pick the good toilet paper. If it's anything like my grocery store, the only thing that's left is like the single ply Scott toilet paper. If they had stepped 10 feet forward and put that wide angle lens up against the remaining toilet paper, it would have looked like there's plenty of toilet paper at the stores, take your time. And the weird cycle is people then wouldn't have felt the urge to go shopping and we wouldn't have had any problem. Here's my project for you. Really look at the images you take in. Think about the story the photographer is trying to tell and ask yourself whether it's true or false, whether it's precise or exaggerated. Break down that fourth wall. Once you start looking at images like a photographer, you can never go back to being just a consumer. Photojournalistic images become more like a based on a true story type of movie, where you look at it and think, some of this is true, some of this is exaggerated, some of this is completely false, and that little bit of cynicism can be really healthy and it can help you develop a more accurate and real view of the world around you. Let me take a second and thank our sponsor, Me. Don't forget, you can buy all of our stuff 50% off for a limited time while we're sheltering at home. So head to northrop.photo, use the coupon code LearnAtHome and get half off our books, video training, presets, or even t-shirts. Thanks. In the comments down below, I'd love to hear what you think of the images you're seeing. How many of them are accurate and how many of them are misleading? What are good examples of photojournalism and what are some bad examples of photojournalism? Thanks, and everybody stay healthy, okay? Bye.